The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Airfield like a serrated blade. What came next would haunt every soul who heard it, a transmission that began as routine and ended as legend. Bravo 6 actual to Overlord. We're taking heavy fire from three positions. Grid 41 S 625,480, 3,831,275. Request immediate CAS over. The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, team leader of SEAL Team 3's Bravo platoon. His words carried the controlled urgency of a man who had danced with death before, but this time, death was leading. In the Tactical Operations Center, fluorescent lights hummed over banks of monitors displaying thermal imagery from a Reaper drone circling 13,000 feet above the Hindu Kush. The grainy green and white feed showed 8 heat signatures pinned behind a crumbling stone wall, surrounded by what appeared to be 40-plus enemy combatants in a horseshoe formation. The SEALs had walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush in the Korangal Valley, a place Marines had nicknamed the Valley of Death for good reason. Colonel James Rivera, the mission commander, stood frozen before the main display, his weathered face illuminated by the cold glow of tactical screens. 27 years of service had taught him to read situations like ancient scripture, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The enemy had done their homework. They'd studied American tactics, learned patrol patterns, and laid a trap with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. "Sir, we've got F-16s 15 minutes out," reported Captain Davis, his voice tight with professional concern. "But with that terrain and the proximity of friendlies to hostiles..." Rivera's jaw clenched. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. The thermal feed showed muzzle flashes erupting like deadly fireworks around the SEAL position. Each flash represented rounds that could end American lives. The mathematics were brutal and simple. 8 Americans with limited ammunition against 40-plus insurgents who knew every rock, every cave, every killing angle in these mountains. Overlord to Bravo 6 actual, help is coming. Hold position and mark your location with IR strobes. We're working the problem. But even as Rivera spoke those words, he knew they rang hollow. The nearest close air support was a flight of F-16s carrying 500-pound JDAMs, weapons designed to level buildings, not provide surgical strikes within danger-close parameters. One miscalculation, one slight deviation in wind or trajectory, and they'd be sending 8 flag-draped coffins home to wives and children who still believed their husbands and fathers were invincible. Then, cutting through the chaos of radio chatter and the steady hum of electronics, came a voice that would change everything. The transmission was clear, confident, and carried the distinct accent of rural Tennessee mixed with something else, something forged in the crucible of combat aviation. "Overlord, this is Reaper 11, A-10 Thunderbolt, currently holding pattern 12 miles northeast of target area. I've been monitoring your frequency. Request permission to provide immediate close air support for Bravo 6 actual." Every head in the TOC turned toward the radio as if the speaker had materialized in the room. Rivera grabbed the handset so quickly it nearly slipped from his fingers. "Reaper 11, confirm your position and armament status." "Overlord, Reaper 11 is loaded with mixed ordnance. 6 AGM-65 Mavericks, 1,174 rounds of 30mm high-explosive incendiary for the GAU-8, and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders. Aircraft is mission-capable with approximately 4 hours of fuel remaining. I can be on station in 8 minutes." Captain Davis leaned toward Rivera, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Sir, I don't show any A-10s scheduled for this sector. Air tasking order shows the closest warthogs are at Kandahar." Rivera pressed the handset again. "Reaper 11, verify your unit and mission authorization." There was a pause, not hesitation, but the kind of silence that comes when someone is choosing their words carefully. When the voice returned, it carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone listening. Overlord, this is Captain Delilah Vance, 442nd Fighter Wing, call sign Reaper 11. I was conducting a training mission when I intercepted your distress call. Those boys don't have 15 minutes, sir, but they've got me right now. The name hit Rivera like a physical blow. Every military aviator worth their wings knew the story of Delilah Vance, though few spoke it aloud. 3 years ago, she'd been the poster child for women in combat aviation, a graduate of the Air Force Academy who could thread a Maverick missile through a window at 10,000 feet. Then came the incident in Syria, a close air support mission that went sideways when intelligence failed, and she'd been forced to make a split-second decision that saved 12 Marines, but cost the lives of 3 civilian contractors. The investigation cleared her of any wrongdoing, but the media crucifixion that followed was merciless. Cable news pundits dissected every frame of gun camera footage, questioning whether a female pilot possessed the mental fortitude for life-and-death decisions. Late-night talk show hosts made jokes about women drivers while families grieved. The Air Force, caught between political pressure and operational necessity, quietly reassigned her to training missions and administrative duties, military purgatory for a pilot who lived to fly combat. Now she was offering to put her career, her life, and her reputation on the line for 8 SEALs she'd never met, in a valley that had already claimed too many American lives. Rivera closed his eyes for a heartbeat, seeing his own reflection in a decision that would define careers and haunt dreams. When he opened them, his voice carried the authority of command and the weight of consequence. Reaper 11, you are cleared hot. Bravo 6 Actual is your responsibility. Bring our boys home. The acknowledgement came back without hesitation. Copy, Overlord. Reaper 11 is inbound. Tell Bravo 6 to keep their heads down. The cavalry is coming. But what nobody in that TOC could have imagined was that the cavalry wore the face of redemption, flew on wings of retribution, and was about to write a legend in the morning sky above the Hindu Kush. In the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, Captain Delilah Vance banked hard left, her aircraft cutting through mountain air so thin it made the engines work harder for every ounce of thrust. The Warthog, ugly, utilitarian, and absolutely lethal, responded to her touch like an extension of her own body. She'd logged over 1,200 hours in the type, more than any other pilot in her squadron, though few people seemed to remember that detail anymore. Below her, the Hindu Kush stretched endlessly in every direction, a moonscape of razor-sharp ridges and valleys so deep they seemed to plunge straight into the Earth's core. Dawn was still 40 minutes away, but the stars provided enough ambient light for her night vision goggles to paint the terrain in sharp green relief. She knew these mountains well, too well. Every peak, every pass held memories she'd rather forget. Bravo 6 Actual, this is Reaper 11. I'm 5 miles out and have you on thermal. Can you mark your position with IR strobe? Reaper 11, Bravo 6 Actual. IR strobes are active. We're the 8 heat signatures behind the stone wall, approximately 50 meters north of the dry riverbed. Enemy positions are in a horseshoe around us, with heavy weapons teams on the ridgeline to our east and southeast. Vance's thumb hovered over the sensor controls as she refined her targeting picture. The forward-looking infrared pod mounted beneath her aircraft painted a detailed thermal image on her heads-up display, showing the tactical situation with crystalline clarity. The SEALs were pinned in a natural depression, using a centuries-old stone wall as cover, while insurgent fighters occupied elevated positions on 3 sides. It was a textbook kill zone, designed to channel targets into a predetermined area where interlocking fields of fire would ensure no escape. Bravo 6 Actual, I have visual on your position. Confirm you are behind the L-shaped stone wall with IR strobes active. Affirmative, Reaper 11. We're taking fire from multiple positions. 2 of my men are wounded, 1 critical. We need immediate suppression on the eastern ridgeline. Vance rolled her aircraft into a shallow dive, airspeed building as the Warthog's distinctive twin engines wound up to a keening whine. Through her night vision goggles, muzzle flashes strobed like deadly lightning across the mountainside. Each flash represented rounds that could kill American soldiers, and each second of delay brought those soldiers closer to becoming statistics in a war that seemed to have no end. The eastern ridgeline came into sharp focus as she lined up her attack run. Thermal imaging showed at least 12 enemy fighters spread across a 200-meter front, their positions marked by the heat signatures of recently fired weapons. She could see them clearly now, individual human beings who had chosen to wage war against her country, her brothers in arms, and everything she'd sworn to defend. Her finger caressed the trigger of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barrel Gatling gun that fired 30-millimeter rounds at a rate of 4,200 per minute. Each round was the size of a small bottle, designed to destroy armored vehicles and fortified positions. Against human targets in the open, it was devastatingly effective. But Vance had learned long ago that pulling the trigger was the easy part. Living with the consequences, that was where heroes were separated from the haunted. Bravo 6 Actual, I'm beginning my attack run on the eastern ridgeline. Keep your people down and away from windows. This is going to be loud. Chief Thorne's voice crackled back through static and gunfire. Copy, Reaper 1-1. We're buttoned up tight. Give 'em hell. Vance squeezed the trigger for a 3-second burst, and the A-10 seemed to slow in midair as the massive cannon unleashed its fury. The sound was indescribable, part roar, part scream, part mechanical thunder that seemed to tear the very fabric of the morning air. Depleted uranium rounds chewed through rock, earth, and flesh with equal indifference, leaving devastation in their wake. The effect was immediate and decisive. Thermal imagery showed the eastern ridgeline transformed from a constellation of enemy heat signatures into a smoking wasteland. Return fire slackened noticeably as surviving insurgents scrambled for deeper cover or retreated entirely. Reaper 1-1, Bravo 6 Actual. Outstanding work. That's got their attention. Enemy fire from the east has ceased, but we're still taking heavy fire from southeast and southwest positions. Vance banked hard right, pulling 6GS as she repositioned for another attack run. The G-force pressed her deep into her ejection seat, making every breath an effort, but she welcomed the familiar sensation. This was where she belonged, not in some climate-controlled simulator or administrative office, but here in the crucible where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. As she rolled into her next attack, something caught her eye on the thermal display. Movement in the valley below, advancing toward the SEAL position from the north. She refined the image, adjusting contrast and magnification until the shapes resolved into recognizable forms. Vehicles, at least 6 of them, moving in tactical formation along what appeared to be a goat path. Technical trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, and what looked like a BTR-60 armored personnel carrier bringing up the rear. The cavalry charge Vance had promised was about to become a cavalry battle, and the SEALs were caught in the middle. Bravo 6 Actual, Reaper 1-1. You've got vehicles inbound from the north, approximately 2 clicks out and closing fast. 6 trucks plus 1 armored vehicle. Recommend immediate displacement if possible. The response came back strained, punctuated by the sharp crack of rifle fire. Negative, Reaper 1-1. We've got 2 wounded who can't be moved. Kowalski took one in the chest and Ramirez has a shattered femur. We hold here or we don't go home at all. Those words hit Vance like a physical blow. She'd heard them before, spoken by different voices in different wars, but the meaning was always the same. Warriors choosing to stand and fight rather than abandon their brothers. It was the code that bound military units together, the unbreakable promise that no one gets left behind. And it was the same code that had led to her downfall in Syria, when she'd chosen to protect a Marine patrol rather than follow rules of engagement that might have kept 3 contractors alive. Now, 3 years later, 8 Navy SEALs were trapped in a valley that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to her personal hell, and the only thing standing between them and annihilation was a disgraced pilot in an ugly airplane that the Air Force had been trying to retire for 2 decades. Vance pulled back on the stick, climbing for altitude as she assessed the tactical situation with the cold precision that had made her one of the most feared close air support pilots in the inventory. The enemy had played their hand well, infantry on 3 sides to pin the SEALs in place, then armor rolling up the valley to finish the job. It was a classic hammer and anvil tactic, simple and effective. But they hadn't counted on the Reaper. Overlord Reaper 1-1. Enemy armor inbound on Bravo 6 Actual's position. Request permission to engage with Mavericks. Rivera's voice came back immediately. Reaper 1-1, you are cleared to engage all hostile armor. Weapons free on anything that's not broadcasting friendly IFF. Vance selected her first AGM-65 Maverick missile, the infrared seeker head painting its target with invisible energy. The BTR-60 armored personnel carrier filled her targeting display, its diesel engine burning hot against the cool mountain air. At this range, the missile was essentially point-and-shoot, fire and forget technology that would guide itself to the target with lethal precision. She squeezed the trigger, feeling the slight shudder as the 300-pound missile separated from its pylon and ignited its solid rocket motor. A plume of white-hot exhaust traced across the pre-dawn sky like a comet, carrying death on wings of fire and vengeance. The impact was catastrophic. The Maverick's 125-pound high-explosive warhead punched through the BTR's armor like tissue paper, detonating inside the crew compartment with devastating effect. The entire vehicle disappeared in a ball of orange flame and black smoke, taking with it any insurgents unlucky enough to be inside. Holy shit, Thorne's voice cracked with amazement and relief. Reaper 1-1, that was beautiful. The whole damn thing just vaporized. But Vance was already lining up her next shot, cycling through targets with the methodical precision of a surgeon. 5 technical trucks remained, their heavy machine guns now turning skyward in a desperate attempt to engage the aircraft that was systematically destroying their convoy. Green tracer rounds arced toward her position, looking like deadly fireflies in her night vision goggles. Some passed close enough that she could see them through her canopy, but the insurgents were firing blind, their weapons inadequate for engaging a fast-moving aircraft at altitude. Her second Maverick streaked toward the lead technical truck, another perfect shot that turned metal, fuel, and flesh into an expanding fireball. The remaining vehicles scattered like startled insects, abandoning their formation in favor of individual survival. Bravo 6 Actual, armor threat is neutralized. 4 vehicles remain, but they're breaking contact and fleeing north. How's your situation? Much improved, Reaper 1-1. Enemy infantry is pulling back on all sides. Whatever magic you're working up there, keep it coming. You've bought us breathing room, but we still can't move Kowalski without a medevac bird. Vance checked her fuel gauge and weapon status. She had plenty of gas remaining and 4 Mavericks still on the rails, plus nearly 1,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition. More importantly, she had something the enemy couldn't calculate or plan for, the desperate fury of a pilot who had spent 3 years waiting for a chance at redemption. As dawn began to break over the Hindu Kush, painting the mountain peaks in shades of pink and gold, Captain Delilah Vance owned the sky above the Korangal Valley, and she had no intention of giving it back. But 12 miles to the southeast, in a cave complex that had sheltered fighters for generations, a different kind of calculation was taking place. Taliban commanders huddled around a radio, listening to reports of devastation from their forces in the valley. The American aircraft had destroyed their ambush, scattered their armor, and turned what should have been a propaganda victory into a humiliating defeat. The decision was made with the cold logic that governs asymmetric warfare. If they couldn't kill the Americans on the ground, they would kill the pilot who protected them. Shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles were already being distributed to teams positioned throughout the valley, and Chinese-made radar operators were scanning the sky for the distinctive heat signature of a single-engine attack aircraft. Captain Delilah Vance had saved 8 Navy SEALs, but in doing so, she had painted a target on herself that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage she possessed. The morning sky that had seemed so peaceful moments before was about to become a gauntlet of fire and steel, where survival would depend on reflexes measured in milliseconds and decisions that would echo through eternity. The Reaper was about to face her greatest test, and the mountains would remember what happened next for generations to come. In the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram, Colonel Rivera watched the tactical display with growing amazement and deepening concern. The thermal feeds from orbiting drones showed the aftermath of Vance's attack runs, burning vehicles scattered across the valley floor like discarded toys, enemy positions reduced to smoking craters, and 8 SEAL heat signatures still clustered behind their stone wall refuge. "Sir, we're monitoring insurgent communications," reported Captain Davis, his headphones pressed tight against his ears. "Multiple references to bringing down the American Death Bird. They're repositioning SAM teams throughout the valley." Rivera's stomach clenched. He'd seen this scenario played out before in Iraq and Afghanistan, a successful close air support mission that turned into a nightmare when the enemy adapted their tactics. Shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles were crude but effective, and they'd claimed their share of American aircraft over the years. He grabbed the radio handset, his voice urgent. "Reaper 1-1, Overlord. Be advised we're picking up chatter about SAM teams moving to engage you. Recommend you climb to high altitude and maintain standoff distance." Vance's response came back without hesitation. "Negative, Overlord. Bravo 6 Actual has wounded who need immediate protection, and I can see more enemy movement in the surrounding ridgelines. I'm staying on station until relief arrives." Reaper 1-1, "That's not a request. Climb to Angels 20 and maintain holding pattern. We've got fast movers inbound with heavier ordnance." There was a pause before Vance responded, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the TOC stop what they were doing. "Sir, with all due respect, those fast movers are 25 minutes out. Bravo 6 Actual doesn't have 25 minutes. They don't have 25 seconds if those insurgents regroup and launch another assault." Rivera stared at the tactical display, seeing the chess match playing out in real time. Scattered throughout the valley, thermal imagery showed small teams of fighters moving toward concealed positions, carrying what appeared to be heavy weapons. They were repositioning for another attack, this time with the knowledge that American air support was overhead. But they were also setting up to ambush that air support, turning the hunter into the hunted, with the patient cunning that had made Afghanistan a graveyard for empires. "Reaper 1-1, Rivera said quietly, "I'm ordering you to climb to safe altitude. That's a direct order." The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Vance's voice returned, and when it did, it carried a finality that chilled everyone listening. "Colonel, I've spent 3 years thinking about what I should have done differently in Syria. 3 years wondering if I was a coward for following orders instead of trusting my instincts. I won't make that mistake again. Reaper 1-1 is staying on station. End of discussion." And with those words, Captain Delilah Vance committed herself to a course of action that would either vindicate her career or end it in a fireball somewhere above the Korangal Valley. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. Not the cautious, second-guessing pilot who'd been grounded by politics and public opinion, but the warrior who'd once been considered the finest close air support pilot of her generation. Chief Thorne pressed his face against the radio handset, trying to filter out the sound of sporadic gunfire and his own labored breathing. Kowalski was getting worse, his chest wound producing a wet, rattling sound that every combat medic learned to fear. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth despite the pressure bandages, and his skin had taken on the waxy pallor that usually preceded shock and system failure. "Doc, how much time does he have?" Thorne whispered to Hospital Corpsman Second Class Martinez, the team's medic. Martinez looked up from where he knelt beside the wounded SEAL, his face grim beneath night vision goggles. "Without surgical intervention, maybe an hour, Chief, maybe less. That round did something to his lung, and I can't fix it here." The math was brutal and simple. The nearest trauma center was at Bagram Airfield, a 40-minute helicopter ride through some of the most dangerous airspace in Afghanistan. But medevac helicopters were large, slow, and vulnerable, sitting ducks for any insurgent with a rocket-propelled grenade and decent aim. They needed the area completely secured before risking a bird and crew. Reaper 1-1, Bravo 6 Actual. I need a realistic assessment of our situation. Can you keep the bad guys' heads down long enough for a dust-off? Vance's voice came back steady and professional. Bravo 6 Actual, I can maintain air superiority over your position indefinitely, but I'm seeing increased activity throughout the valley. They're moving in teams of 3 to 4 individuals, probably carrying heavy weapons. My guess is they're setting up interlocking fields of fire to deny helicopter access. Thorne closed his eyes, seeing the tactical picture with the clarity that comes from too many deployments and too many close calls. The enemy had learned from their mistakes, adapting their strategy from direct assault to area denial. They couldn't kill the SEALs in a frontal attack, so they'd prevent rescue and let time and blood loss do their work for them. It was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. Copy, Reaper 1-1. What are your recommendations? There was a pause before Vance responded, and when she did, her voice carried the confidence of a pilot who had found her element. Bravo 6 Actual, I recommend aggressive suppression of suspected enemy positions throughout the valley. Make it too dangerous for them to maintain observation or set up weapon systems. It's going to be loud and it's going to be close, but it's the only way to open a corridor for your dust-off. Roger that. We trust your judgment, Reaper 1-1. You're the expert. Those words, "you're the expert," hit Vance harder than she'd expected. For 3 years, every decision she'd made had been questioned, second-guessed, and dissected by people who'd never sat in a cockpit during combat. Her expertise had been dismissed, her judgment called into question, and her instincts overruled by bureaucrats and politicians who measured success in headlines rather than lives saved. But here, in this valley where death lurked behind every ridge and honor could be measured in the space between heartbeats, 8 Navy SEALs were trusting her with their lives based solely on her professional competence and warrior's instinct. Bravo 6 Actual, beginning systematic suppression of suspected enemy positions. Keep your people low and tight against that stone wall. This is about to get biblical. Vance rolled her A-10 into a steep dive, the aircraft's distinctive twin engines screaming as she lined up on a ridge where thermal imaging had detected suspicious movement. Her targeting computer painted the terrain in stark detail, highlighting potential threats with the cold precision of military technology. But behind the displays and sensors, behind the calculated angles of attack and ballistic trajectories, was something far more primitive and powerful, a warrior's fury finally unleashed after 3 years of enforced restraint. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again, its voice a mechanical thunderclap that echoed off mountain walls and reverberated through stone valleys carved by millennia of wind and water. 30-millimeter rounds chewed through rock and earth, sending geysers of pulverized stone into the thin mountain air. Where moments before there had been concealed fighting positions, now there were only smoking craters and the scattered debris of human ambition. Jesus Christ! Martinez looked up from Kowalski's still form, his medical training temporarily overwhelmed by the sheer destructive spectacle unfolding above them. Chief, that pilot is tearing this place apart. But even as Vance dominated the tactical situation, her fuel gauge was becoming an increasingly urgent concern. The A-10 was designed for efficiency and endurance, but combat operations at low altitude consumed fuel at an alarming rate. She had perhaps 90 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe less if she continued flying aggressive attack profiles. More critically, every pass over the valley exposed her to ground fire from increasingly desperate insurgents. Tracers arced toward her aircraft with growing frequency, and thermal imaging showed teams of fighters moving with the disciplined urgency of men carrying surface-to-air missiles. Overlord Reaper 11, I need immediate update on medevac ETA. My fuel state is becoming a factor, and enemy SAM activity is increasing. Rivera's voice came back tight with stress. Reaper 11, dust-off is inbound your position, ETA 12 minutes. Call sign Pedro 77, flying with Apache escort. Can you maintain air superiority until they arrive? Vance checked her fuel gauge again, running mental calculations that balanced flight time against tactical necessity. 12 minutes was cutting it close, but manageable if she flew smart and avoided unnecessary maneuvering. Copy, Overlord. I can hold for 12 minutes, but that medevac better be fast on the ground. I won't have fuel for extended cover. As if summoned by her words, thermal imaging detected new movement in the valley. A team of 4 insurgents positioning what appeared to be a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile system on a ridge overlooking the SEAL position. The weapon's distinctive heat signature was unmistakable to anyone who'd studied Soviet-era military hardware. It was an SA-18 Igla, NATO designation grouse, with a maximum effective range of 5,200 meters and an infrared seeker designed specifically to track aircraft exhaust signatures. In the hands of a trained operator, it was more than capable of bringing down an A-10 Thunderbolt. The hunter had officially become the hunted. Bravo 6 Actual, I've got SAM team setting up on ridge bearing 320 degrees from your position. I'm going to take them out, but this is going to put me in their engagement envelope. If things go bad, you'll have approximately 8 minutes before Pedro arrives. Chief Thorne's voice came back grim but determined. Copy, Reaper 11. We'll be ready for whatever comes next. Give 'em hell. Vance pushed the throttles forward, the twin turbofan engines responding with increased thrust that pressed her back into the ejection seat. They accelerated toward the SAM team's position, airspeed building, as she committed to an attack run that would either eliminate the threat or turn her aircraft into a falling star somewhere above the Hindu Kush. Through her night vision goggles, she could see them clearly now, 4 men in traditional Afghan clothing, kneeling around a launcher that looked innocuous until you understood its purpose. One man held the grip stock, tracking her aircraft's approach with practiced patience. Another crouched beside him with spare missiles, ready to reload if the first shot missed. They were professionals, not the amateur fighters who had fled her earlier attacks. These men had been trained to kill aircraft, and they possessed both the equipment and expertise to do it effectively. At 2,500 meters range, she saw the telltale flash of missile ignition, a brief bloom of white-hot exhaust that meant death was climbing toward her at 3 times the speed of sound. The SA-18 seeker head had locked onto her engine's heat signature, and sophisticated guidance algorithms were now calculating intercept vectors with lethal precision. Every instinct screamed at her to break off the attack, to dive for the deck or climb for altitude, to do something, anything, other than fly straight into the path of a missile designed specifically to kill her aircraft. Instead, Captain Delilah Vance did something that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. She held her course and pressed the attack. Her thumb found the GAU-8's trigger, and for the 3rd time that morning, the Warthog's massive cannon unleashed its fury. But this time, she wasn't firing at static positions or fleeing vehicles. This time, She was firing at men who were trying to kill her, men whose missile was even now climbing toward her aircraft with inexorable purpose. The 30mm rounds reached their targets in a stream of depleted uranium and high explosive, turning the SAM team's position into a crater of pulverized rock and scattered metal. But the missile they'd launched continued its climb, its seeker head still locked onto her engines, its proximity fuse armed and ready to detonate when it reached optimum kill distance. Vance yanked the stick hard left, pulling 6GS as she threw the A-10 into a diving spiral that would have torn the wings off a lesser aircraft. The missile followed, its maneuverability impressive but not infinite. At the bottom of her dive, she leveled off mere hundreds of feet above the valley floor, using terrain masking to break the seeker's lock. The SA-18 detonated harmlessly against a mountainside, its warhead creating a brief flower of orange flame and black smoke. But the victory came at a cost. Her fuel gauge now showed critical levels, and thermal imaging revealed at least 2 more SAM teams moving into position throughout the valley. Overlord Reaper 1-1. SAM threat neutralized, but fuel state is now critical. I need that medevac bird here now, or I'm going to have to break station for emergency refueling. Pedro 7-7, Overlord. You are cleared direct to Bravo 6 Actual's position. Reaper 1-1 has suppressed enemy activity, but be advised multiple SAM threats remain active in the valley. The response came in the calm, professional voice of a medevac pilot who had flown into hell more times than he cared to remember. Copy, Overlord. Pedro 7-7 is 3 minutes out with Apache escort. Reaper 1-1, can you provide top cover during ground operations? Vance glanced at her fuel gauge one final time, seeing numbers that should have sent her racing toward the nearest airfield. But below her, 8 Navy SEALs waited for salvation that was now measured in minutes and seconds, and one of those SEALs was bleeding out while his brothers watched helplessly. Pedro 7-7, Reaper 1-1. I'll stay overhead until you're clear of the area. Count on it. It was a promise that might cost her aircraft, her career, and possibly her life. But for Captain Delilah Vance, it was also the easiest decision she'd made in 3 years. Some promises were worth keeping regardless of cost, and some stands had to be made even when the odds were impossibly long. The morning sky above the Korengal Valley was about to witness an act of courage that would echo through military history. The story of a disgraced pilot who found redemption in the crucible of combat, and who proved that true warriors are measured not by their mistakes, but by their willingness to sacrifice everything for the people they're sworn to protect. As the distinctive sound of rotor blades echoed off the valley walls, Captain Delilah Vance prepared to write the final chapter of her personal war. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the knowledge that she had kept faith with the warrior's code, and that sometimes keeping faith is victory enough. The HH-60 Pave Hawk medevac helicopter crested the eastern ridge of the Korengal Valley like a mechanical angel, its rotors beating the thin mountain air with rhythmic precision. Painted in subdued military colors and bristling with defensive equipment, Pedro 7-7 represented hope, made manifest for 8 trapped Navy SEALs and their dying teammate. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Morrison, the aircraft's pilot, had been flying combat rescue missions for 12 years. His hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency while his eyes scanned the terrain below, looking for threats that could turn his aircraft into a falling fireball. The valley spread before him like an ancient amphitheater of death, scar,